you're walking around and you're seeing stairs and ledges and all this stuff that people just never pay attention to. And you feel like you have this secret. You feel like, oh, it's crazy that all these people are walking by this thing and they just don't care. But this is like my gold mine.
Hello, and welcome to the Flying Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to discussion and exploration of art and the creative process. I'm the host and creator, Aaron S., and for this week's episode, I had a conversation with the amazing Christopher McCurdy. Christopher is a photographer from North Carolina who shoots atmospheric and often cinematic images. Often quiet, eerie, and soaked in otherworldly green hues, his work captures spaces and places that are often overlooked or disregarded. Perfecto. So I'm just going to start where I start with everybody, which is just tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
Yeah. Well, my name's Chris McCurdy. I live in South Carolina in the United States. I don't know how I became an artist. I don't know if I still don't really consider myself that. But I guess it comes from watching skate videos, stuff like that, at an early age, kind of understanding, like, oh, if I'm listening to a certain song or what have you, all of a sudden the images I'm seeing look different. You know, and it's the same thing with your state of mind at the time, whatever. So I always like how can I explain it? Like, let's say you're feeling bad, right? And you're like, man, this doesn't benefit my life at all. I just feel terrible. But then you go create something, and later on, you can kind of see, you know, the differences in the work. So you start to look at certain states of mind, like mostly negative states of mind, as, oh, this is actually a tool rather than, you know, something that has to hold you down. Does that make sense? So I like that aspect of it. I like being able, I just wanted to have something that allowed me, you know, if I'm not at work or just doing normal everyday life things, it's like something to strive for, something to, you know, the hobby aspect of it. Like, oh, I want this lens or this or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, because that's interesting. Because I think it gives you some kind of sense of escapism, I guess, is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like escaping, but like into what's actually happening, you know? But it still gives you a little bit of a shield to kind of see it. You know? It's like something that allows you to experience the world, but still be that fly in the wall, sort of just a kind of observer, but you're still there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess it's because you get to reframe the world how you see it. And also with photography, particularly kind of like night images, especially, like it almost becomes otherworldly. So it's like you're creating images that are your perspective, but they're also kind of denote to something else. They're not just, oh, this is a parking lot, or this is just like a house. It could be like the atmosphere or like the experience or the suggestion of something else.
Yeah, no, I find that a lot of it, I don't know if it means anything at the time, but then looking back later, it's like, man, I'm lonely, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of a way to discover my own feeling, even if they're just subconscious. They're not, you know, not always deliberate.
Well, that's actually a really interesting way to think about it in terms of like that your work is very reflective of you as a person, even if you don't realize it is in the moment you're shooting it. And also like what you decide to shoot as well is very reflective of the person you are.
Me and my wife, we just shot an event. And it was funny. I was talking to my friend and I was saying, you know, I was looking at all my images and I'm in this huge group of people, which is totally opposite from what I normally do.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, it's like everyone, like, I obviously know, okay, there's some good emotion over there. There's some joy. There's some whatever. Tell the story of this, you know, this event, this party. It's a festive atmosphere. And I was looking at my images and I was like, man, it still feels like even in the midst of this huge group of people, all extroverted, all outgoing, still get this sense of like outside looking in, if that makes sense, through
Hmm.
my images. And when I looked at my wife's images, it felt like she was a part of the group. And I can't really
Oh.
explain it. It's just a subtle sort of thing. But I was laughing to my friend. I was like, it's funny, no matter how hard you try, I could take fisheye images of groups, everyone's happy, and it would still have a sense of you're just not quite connected to these people. And it's like it was funny. I was saying it's like you really can't fake anything. Like no matter how hard you try, whoever you are still comes out in the images. It was the first time I kind of realized that. It just made me laugh. It's just interesting.
That's an interesting consideration, though, particularly when photography, especially, can be very deceptive, or at least appears to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually quite an interesting consideration because I think, like at the minute, I'm really interested in people's personalities behind the work. I think, hence this, the whole podcast, I guess. But it's just like it's always interesting to know who the person is, not just the images they make or the work they create, because it's like there's a reason you're doing this. There's a reason you feel compelled to do this, and it's like you may not know it yourself why, but there is some kind of ultimate goal. And do you feel like you have a certain goal or a certain kind of uh, like reason for why you do it?
It's funny. I've been thinking about that lately. I mean, my goal is to be able to support myself through my art. Uh, you know, I work a retail job right now, and I love it when I'm in the mood. You know,
Mm. Oh, I work a retail job too. I know exactly how that feels. I know exactly how that feels.
I could be there and I'm in a great mood, and I'm like, wow, I actually love having this job because I get exercise, I get the people skills that I would not get if I weren't here,
Mm.
and everything's great, and it balances with my more artistic lifestyle, my hobbies, and it kind of feels like it all meshes. But then there's other times where it feels like they're totally at odds with each other, and doing one hurts the other, and then everything kind of sinks lower. So I want to get to a point where I get to decide what I'm doing. It's all
Mm.
my passion. It's not I got to call three managers and see when I can go to lunch, and you know
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. But I agree because you want to be able to do stuff on your own time. Because the thing is, particularly with being artistic, is like particularly with retail work as well. Like when you're inspired, may not be the time you're able to do anything. Like you might be working a morning shift, but you want to go out on mornings and shoot, or you might want to shoot at night, but you're working night shifts. It's like you have to go out and create when you're inspired. And I think sometimes working a part-time job or a full-time job doesn't allow you that flexibility.
Mhm. And I'm starting to experience. I'm starting to have little milestones here and there of growth in my art in the field I've chosen with photography, and it's really interesting because I'll feel so good about myself and so elated, so high for that night, and then I wake up and it's back to, oh, I'm a loser. I got to get something done with it, and it hurts. But at the same time, I've never experienced that sort of drive before. Uh, and one thing I keep realizing is that every time I have that low feeling, I mean, I almost feel like an addict in a way. It's like a new sort of addiction of, okay, you got that high, you got those feel good feelings of whatever it may be. You saw something cool, you had a little adventure driving around looking for stuff, people really resonated with your stuff, but it resets so fast, and you're right back to, man, I haven't produced anything. I gotta, you know,
Yeah.
all normal stuff, I'm sure, but it's my first time really experiencing that. And to me, I'm really trying to understand that that right there is the whole, the cliche journey is the reward.
Oh,
That's what I've always wanted. I've always wanted to wake up and feel like, okay, what can I do today to further this thing? It's kind of gamifying life in a way. Uh, so I definitely feel that now, which is the thing I'm most grateful for.
so I think what impresses me most about your work is your consistency. You're consistently amazing. Like your work is consistently good. And I'm very much like a big fan of people who create great work, but also consistently great work. Um, so I'm always impressed by just kind of like your dedication. And I'm really kind of just curious, like, where does the idea of your dedication come from? Like, why photography?
Well, I mean, to be 100% honest with you, photography at first, just because I felt like it would be the easiest.
Hmm.
You know, like I said, I still don't. When you call me an artist, when I call myself an artist, there's just a tinge of like, oh, why am I saying this? Why is this person saying this? You know, because the thing that always drew me is, like I said, it's kind of a combination of visual and sound. And
Hmm.
obviously, with photography, you're kind of lacking that. But I can still get a sense of like, okay, what would this sort of scene look like to this song or what have you? And I just felt like photography would be the easiest way to kind of scratch that itch. Um, and like I said, I grew up skateboarding, so I had nothing but skateboard magazines, and you read all the interviews, and the photographers, he's basically a part of the team. And I always like the idea of, okay, here's this thing that I really love, skateboarding, but I'm probably not going to be the greatest skater of all time, but there's all these other fields attached to this thing, um, where you can still be a part of that world. Um, so that was the first time photography kind of presented itself to me. And obviously, I'm reading skate magazines, so I'm seeing all these images of not just the cool tricks they're doing, but also just the lifestyle shots. Like we're at this hotel in Spain, and then we went here. I would love seeing all those kind of in between images, you know. So that's what first got me interested in it.
So you said that, you're kind of hesitant to describe yourself as an artist, but like, what do you think it means to be an artist then?
Well, I guess the main hang up for me is I feel like there's a difference in people that what is the thing? It's like where some people take an image and some people create an image.
Hmm.
I feel like I do best when I have the sort of sandbox of tools in front of me and I can just fiddle around with them and eventually, oh, this looks cool. But if I had to create all those sort of things in front of you from scratch, to me, in my mind, I'm like, oh, those are the quote unquote real artists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's how it is. That's just how my brain kind of interprets it sometimes.
So where would you put, so I guess you would draw a distinction between like an image taker and an image maker. Like where would you put yourself on that scale?
Uh, I put myself as an image taker. I mean, I get that maker sort of aspect through my editing. Um,
Hmm.
but even then, I feel like all the tools are right in front of me. I'm in Lightroom and I'm messing with sliders. I'm not adding this there or when I go to a scene, I'm not thinking, oh, what can I add to it? I'm just looking for things. So if I take a cool image of like an old car or something like that, it's like I didn't produce that. Someone parked that car there. The fog was there. The light was how it is. You know, um, and I do get enjoyment of the fact that I can see that,
Hmm.
and whereas other people just because that's the number one similarity with photography to skateboarding to me. Is skateboarding. I always loved the fact that all of a sudden the world looks totally different to you. You're walking around and you're seeing stairs and ledges and all this stuff that people
Yeah.
just never pay attention to. And you feel like you have this secret. You feel like, oh, it's crazy that all these people are walking by this thing and they just don't care. But this is like my gold mine. So with photography, I feel that exact same thing. That's why a lot of the images I take are of like rougher sort of areas because I feel like they're truly beautiful and unique. You know, Um, and I feel like people just ride past it, don't care. So I like being able to find it and hopefully, show people like, hey, this stuff is a lot more interesting than, driving around some sort of gentrified area where there's just Starbucks, Best Buy, all these chain stores. Like I like the older stuff, you know?
But it's like the beauty in the kind of disregarded, I guess, that's much more interesting to you.
Yeah.
See, I actually really love what you said about the idea of like perspective and the way that being a photographer and also skateboarding changes your perspective. And I couldn't agree more because I definitely
Mhm.
feel like, for me especially, like, when I walk around nowadays, even just like to work, like
Mhm.
I walk to work and I'm like, oh, I could photograph this and oh, I could photograph that, and it's really
Mhm.
strange how you do see the world extremely differently, and like everything becomes the world becomes a playground. Like everything becomes a potential for something. It's not just, oh, this is a tree. It's like, how is the tree going to look? And you look at like, how is the light hitting the tree? And then you're like, oh, what does that say? And it kind of opens you up to kind of, I don't know, like
Yeah.
the depth of the world, I think. I don't know if that makes any sense, but for me,
Yeah.
especially,
And it starts to feel like, okay, if I didn't have this, like, man, that would not be good, you know?
yeah, but it's kind of weird because I think lately I've been really kind of compelled, and it's like
Mm.
you feel compelled to photograph something. Not that you know why, you just feel like I need to photograph this. Um,
Yeah.
and actually, I'm kind of curious, like, is there an image that you regret not taking?
Uh, there's so many. Yeah, so many. Like we talked about once before, but
Yeah.
I'll just reiterate. Um, yeah, every single time I go shoot, there's an infinite amount of images or what kills me is not really a specific image itself. It's more of like a set of possibilities,
Hmm.
you know. Um, because one of the rushes I get from going out at night and taking photos is, I'm going to explore somewhere new. I'm going to go through this neighborhood, see where it leads. We're kind of throwing the dice at life a little bit. Like I'm the type of person I need that, especially working a job 9 hours a day. I
Yeah.
need that sort of rush, that feeling that I'm doing something crazy. I'm doing something interesting. Everyone else is asleep and I got off work and I'm doing this. But then there's so many times where just fear of everything, just, oh, it's too crowded out here. I'm too far from home. I have to make sure I get back by this time, whatever it might be. Uh, that will stop me from exploring certain areas or staying out when I'm in a good flow. Uh, and those things, they stop. They used to drive me nuts. Now I look at it as a good thing, um, because it's kind of like, I don't know how to explain it. Like I look at it as a good thing because at least it shows me like, all right, well next time, keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. Bad feelings you have, just always keep it in mind and try to come back next time without any regrets. But they'll
I,
always be there. There's always be a coulda, shoulda, woulda.
I guess it gives you limits though, which is kind of a good thing. It means that you're not going to just kind of go all out and go crazy, take, thousands of images and then be like, cool, I'm done. I don't need to do anything else ever again. It gives you like
Mm,
it's almost like a capping point. It caps you off so that, you can come back again and do it again. Otherwise,
yeah,
you might go out and shoot your best work tomorrow. And then what would you do after that?
yeah. Because I do the thing all the time where I've just started out. I'm driving somewhere. I'm not sure where I'm going, and then I'll pass something that looks really interesting, but there's a bunch of cars on the road and I got to get over a couple of lanes. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'll remember that. I'll remember
Hmm.
that. And on the way back, I'll look at it. And I never do. Sometimes I do, but most times I end up so far away from that spot and zigzagged all around that I don't get back to it. And then I'll forget about it for a couple of days and I'll remember it and I'll go back and a certain car or whatever that was there is not there anymore. And I'm like, oh, I should have remembered that. But at the same time, it's really not a big deal because it's all random anyway. I don't know what's going to be there. So, like I said, I don't, not really too much regret these days when it comes to that. There
So
will
for
be something new somewhere.
See, that's really interesting actually, because I think you're now you mentioned it, like that's a good point. I think it has a chance because like I'm assuming then you don't. So do you actually ever revisit another place? Do you ever be like, cool, I'm going to come back here and go back to the same place?
Yeah, all the time. Like all the time. Um, I used to feel bad about that because for a long time I wasn't able to drive. I didn't have a
Hmm.
car, so I was just walking everywhere. So
Yeah.
when you're walking, you really kind of have to constantly visit the same spot. And
Yeah.
a lot of my earlier night work is like multiple shots at the same place, but they're all totally different. So where if you kind of scroll through my thing, you might not notice. But yeah, I revisit stuff constantly. Um, One of my favorite photographers is Daido Moriyama, and he talks about that a lot, about that being part of it is revisiting, just constant revisiting. And that's his style too. He just walks out the door and just walks around, sees what happens. So yeah, definitely revisit stuff quite often.
So for those men I've seen it, could you describe your work?
Well, they're nighttime images. That's easy. The nighttime images of old cars, churches, things like that. Those are things that are like if you were to drive around in my area, it might be like, wow, there's nothing going on here. And a lot of times the eye-catching things at nights around here are churches, maybe some kind of neon sign somewhere or something like that. Things that aren't over the top exciting, but they just have a certain feel to them. And I like taking pictures of stuff like that. And like I said, where there's no clear story at first, but as I build a body of work, I'm able to go over and see like, okay, there's a huge similarity in this image, this image, this image. They all have the same sort of color grade. I'm a huge fan of the color green, and that
Yes.
might be obvious from my work. Um,
Yes.
that comes from watching Wong Kar Wai movies, uh, particularly the movie Fallen Angels. When I watched that movie, it just felt like this is exactly how I imagine night in my head, like this sort of green and red undertone to everything. I just love that so much. That's one of my big inspirations when it comes to my look.
So I have quite a few questions. So what to ask you next? Because the truth, actually, I'll ask you about now. I was a bit later on, but I'll ask you now because it's a good time. But the idea of like style, like how important is style to you in your work?
Um, I'm not quite sure because on one hand, I definitely want to have a style, um, uh, but at the same time, just I also want to be free to try whatever.
Hmm.
You know, sometimes I'll look at like minimal sort of photography, like minimalist photography, and I'll just feel like I don't get it. You know,
Hmm.
like scrolling through this stuff doesn't do anything for me. And then something somewhere will subconsciously get in my brain, and then I'll see an image out in the world that looks like those minimalist images I just talked about, and take I'll take the image and I'll edit it, and it'll look like those minimalist photos that I was just looking at. And all of a sudden, now that I've created it, I'm like, this is the next thing. This is awesome. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It can kind of change all over the place. Um, I guess
And
I still am just kind of unsure of what even is style, because like I
yeah,
said, I have a style that even when I try my hardest to, be a quote unquote professional event photographer and take the sort of images that, I think that the people paying me would want to see. Even then, there's no escape from my images feeling a certain way. So I don't really think about it that much, you know. Um, when it comes to style, I'm starting to notice it a lot more on things like Twitter, where
hmm.
you can share like four images at once, and obviously you're you're thinking about it a little bit differently. I feel like that's for me, that's where style starts coming out. It's not in single images, but how I choose to kind of stitch them together. You know, uh, I feel like my style comes out more uh, like that rather than in single images. But at the same time, I think someone else could look at my work and explain like, "Oh, his style is like this." But for me, I don't know. I'm just a little too into it to really give you a clear
Hmm.
answer. I mean, to answer your question, yes, it's very important. Like, I want people to think of me, even just using the word literally. I want them to look at my work and be like, "That's a stylish guy." You know, even though I know that's not exactly me, but uh, it doesn't feel that conscious from me. You know.
So that's actually a really interesting observation. The idea of style not being defined by one image, but being defined by the way in which you present the images. Like that's absolutely something I've been thinking about for a long time because that's such an interesting point. It's not something I've really thought about because I feel like with Instagram, the whole carousel situation is nice, but it's not always the best.
Yeah.
Um, so that's actually a really interesting consideration in terms of like, well, actually, it's how you choose to present your work that also determines style. There's
Yeah.
a photographer friend of mine called Parse. I don't know if you know
Mm-hmm.
his work. And recently he posted as just a normal carousel, but he laid it out quite interestingly. And like that was really interesting to see because it's like switching things up and trying things like differently that can really pull people's attention just because it's different. Sometimes we get bored of the same thing,
Yeah, and also like another one of my big inspirations in photography is Todd Hido.
of course.
And one of the things he talks about is he seems so similar to me in that he's not really trying to say anything in particular with his images, but he's fascinated by the meaning that others take from them. You know, because everyone always does. I'll post something and I'll feel like, man, this is like a happy sort of feeling from this image. And all the comments would be like, this is so eerie, but I'm like, eerie? Like what? But I mean,
But
I obviously get what they're feeling. I just love that we can just feel totally different about the thing, you know?
but that's great thing because it opens up a conversation. And I'm assuming that's what you want your work to do is open a conversation.
Yeah.
Hmm. So what makes something photo worthy?
I think just the feeling it gives you is really just as simple as that. There's a lot of things that I take pictures of that I never post or anything like that. Um, I'm gonna give you a funny slash interesting one. Um, when I first got into photography, and I didn't know exactly, okay, cameras, all that. I got a BlackBerry Curve, like I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. It had like a two megapixel camera on it. And when I first ever started taking photos, I would take photos of local malls, like the food court, stuff like that. Because whenever I was at those places, I would feel good.
Hmm.
Like I loved going to those places. It would just give me a good feeling. Think of the feeling you get when you go to the movie
Hmm.
theater, you know? And my whole thing was I want to capture that feeling to show other people how these places make me feel. So for whatever reason, like, I was really into video games for a long time. And when I was young, whenever I'd feel real depressed or something, I would imagine either GameStop or Best Buy or some kind of store like that. I would imagine it in the rain because I love the rain as well. So I would imagine like a GameStop or some kind of game store in the rain. And that would just make me feel so good and this cozy feeling. And it's funny because still to this day, I've never tried to take an image of that, but I always think about it. Like the feeling of, like when I would feel bad, I would look on this BlackBerry and I just have a bunch of images of like a Belks or a Macy's or something, like images that nobody would ever look at and feel like, oh, this is a great image. I would know the feeling that I'm trying to, and when I would look back at those images, it would make me feel better. And because, I can't exactly Google GameStop in the rain and get a feel good
Yeah.
feeling from it. I had to kind of make it myself in my own little weird way of dealing with whatever bad feelings. And I think I'm still doing that, just in kind of a more subconscious way. Like I'm taking images of places that might not make people like feel happy, but it's sort of sad but happy at the same time. That's really what I'm trying to capture.
Because I think that the kind of people who understand your work are the kind of people that understand your work. I think it's particularly like
Mm,
nighttime images. I think there's a niche for it. Obviously, there's a very big niche for it actually. Um,
mm,
but I also feel like there's a reason that we gravitate towards that. Like there's something about like even myself, whether I'm shooting them or I look at them, like there's something about an image at night that's just absolutely beautiful. I think it's a sense
mm,
of just kind of this quiet. I love images that are really quiet and just silent
yeah,
and that are very
yeah,
like pensive. That make you think about life and they make you kind of question. They make you question both the location and the story, but also like who you are as a viewer, like why you're situated in this environment and what it means to
mhm,
you. And it's kind of interesting because as a photographer, that's kind of what you do. You kind of put the viewer into your environment. You almost put them into your
mhm,
shoes and be like, look at what I'm feeling. So you mainly shoot at nighttime. And I'm kind of
mhm.
curious, like, do you feel like nighttime images are overdone?
Uh, no, I don't. I will say, like when I first started doing it, I kind of had a sense that like not a lot of people are doing this, and
Hmm.
it kind of felt special. Like, oh, I'm brave, I'm special, I'm unique, and the way the sort of algorithm works, it feels like once I started really honing in on that style and it kind of became my main thing. Everyone that I'm getting shown is also a night photographer. Um, so I kind of had this thing in my head, and it's a very sort of egotistical thing, but I kind of had this thing in my head for a while. It's like once I started doing it, everyone's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is obviously ridiculous, but
Yeah.
I did think that, and uh, but the more I looked, the more I realized like I could see how to the layman, like all these night images probably look the exact same. But when I'm looking at them, everyone feels so different from mine. Like I really don't think it's overdone, and I kind of I kind of look at it as its own sort of hobby.
Hmm.
Like, well, in the aspect of like just going out and searching and all that. Like obviously people that shoot photos in the day are doing the exact same thing, but for some reason with night it kind of feels like its own thing. So I've always said like, man, I wish there was a podcast for this. Like, let's not talk about photography. Let's talk about this night thing that we're doing. Like, are you using a GPS everywhere? Or how do you have your car set up? Do you shoot out your window a lot? How do you park in this situation? Like all that sort of stuff. I'm very interested in. Uh, so I think it'd be cool to start seeing stuff like that. That's one thing my wife suggested to me is why don't you show more about the process of doing this? I think it'd be interesting to people, you know, where
100%.
you go and how long you take and what podcast you're listening to, what music you're listening to.
100%.
That's one thing that ever since she kind of put that idea in my head, I've been looking at all these night images and I've been asking the same question as her. Is, what's the story with this place? How did you get there? How did you find this? All that sort of thing. One thing that I do find very, I don't know, I don't want to say frustrating, but I find that night images get lumped in with this sort of digital art kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
it's it's infuriating in a way because I find myself looking at all these night images that I don't know are, you know, so heavily doctored and just, they really are just like a painting or something like that. But I'm looking at it and I can't tell. And it makes me feel like, man, my images suck. How are people finding this same cloaked, hooded figure everywhere? You know what I mean? And I'm just like, how are they finding this illuminated phone booth in the middle of a field? Like, what is going on? I need to look harder. And then I was starting to realize, like, oh no, all this stuff is fake. And I hate saying fake because I mean, obviously, the sky isn't green. You know what I mean? And you look at my images, and the sky's green, things are weird colors, blah blah blah. But like I said, I feel like I'm manipulating what's there. That's the only thing I don't like is there's not a distinction between this sort of digital art, and especially now with AI art seeming to have exploded. There's images out there that, especially on a small screen, it's just an AI art, and you look like, man, that's a really great night photograph. Like, what am I doing wrong? It's kind of the exact same to me as what women must deal with, just seeing Photoshop models and everything everywhere, and then constantly comparing themselves to that. It's just a little micro scale version of that to me sometimes.
That a really interesting comparison of digital art, particularly like phone booths at night. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think of so many in my mind. Even just like silhouetted film noir figures in the fog, stuff like that. Like I love stuff like that. Like people like Taiwan, there's really great, amazing digital artists who are doing stuff that are gorgeous, but there are also photographers who are doing stuff just as great in real life. So I 100% agree with you.
So that's one of the things I always think about. Like, I'm very, very grateful and lucky that my wife, when we do events and stuff like that, she's usually the one that sets something like that up. And she's very good at, talking to people, posing people, even if it's just nothing particularly amazing. It's just a group shot. You know what I mean? That sort of stuff, man, I'm almost shaking thinking about it. Like, it makes me very nervous. And so I always feel this sort of thing of, oh, there's this part missing from me. Like, I wouldn't be able to, like, sometimes I get a very flattering comment, like, you should be a director of photography or on a film or something like that. And I'm like, man, if you were to tell me, like, go recreate this image or whatever, it's like, I don't know if I could. I feel like a lot of times, like, I just see something interesting. I happen to take the photo, and a lot of it comes out in the editing. But if you were to tell me, set this whole thing up, find the location, here's the model, you can do whatever, you can have infinite tools. My brain just starts going blank and it gets scared,
I think you're not giving yourself enough credit, because I feel like, yes, you're right. You go out and find a location, you like it, you shoot it, you think, oh, cool, post-processing, cool. But there has to be something inside of you in the first place for you to actually go and take a picture of a place, for you to know what to do with that after. So you've got the foresight to be like, this image of a dumpster at night is going to look great in these colors.
But I guess it's just, it would be like, hey, I could do a photo shoot with you in this sort of style, but you're going to have to do it my way. Like, I don't have this dialed in. I don't know, let's go here and I'm going to use this light. It's like, you're just going to have to ride in the car with me, and we're just going to have to become friends and just try things,
That's exactly what you need to do. You need to do something that's like very low expectation. There's low pressure. There's nothing that nothing has to turn out right. It's just a case of like experimentation. What you want is play. You want to be able to go out with your camera, grab a model, grab a friend, grab just maybe not some random stranger, but grab somebody you kind of know and be like, yo, let's kind of create some work. It might be great, it might not be. That's what you need to do. I think past that'd be great for you, because I can imagine if you added more figures to your image, that could be insanely cool. Your work is gorgeous as it is, but it's just like, there is so much potential. You just have to have that self-belief that, yes, of course, the first time you do it, it might go terribly. It might not work well. It might break. But then you just kind of keep doing it, persist. Like, it's got you this far already. Look how great your work is now.
But yeah, I guess whenever I think about it, I just imagine, I imagine some random photographer, I might have listened to their whole audiobook or something like that. So my first image and expectation is like this consummate pro. And I'm like, well, I'm not that, so I can't do that. I struggle with that.
Yeah, that's a mindset that I would advise you to think about changing, or think about how you can change that, because there is no such thing as a professional.
It's a lifelong process.
Oh, yeah, of course. But you have to also remember there's no such thing as a professional photographer really nowadays. In the landscape we're in photography, you can shoot images on your iPhone and have a campaign. There's no such thing as professional. Like, yes, just because you might not have the gear, the lighting, the crew, the setup, that doesn't mean you can't create top quality, incredible images, even just with a flashlight, and natural light outside at night. It's about
Mhm.
learning the skills that are going to get your work elevated to the next level. And actually, I have loads of course suggestions for you, actually, if you want them. Um, because I just talking to you now, I'm thinking about all the different photographers that I know that whose work is gorgeous and interesting and fascinating, but they don't have all the tools. They don't have, you know, thousands of dollars worth of equipment or cameras or whatever, And the thing is also nowadays, like for me personally, I've always felt like gears most times gear is overrated. Unless you're having like a billboard, unless you're going to create billboards or creating ad campaigns, or you're creating, work that's going to be, huge size. Like you don't need a full frame camera. You don't need the best tool ever. You just need something that creates. And then that'll get you
Yeah,
somewhere, that'll get you to the next level.
yeah, and that's one thing I try to be cognizant of because for me, it's not really a feeling of, oh, I don't have the right gear or
Mm,
whatever. I don't really care about a lot of that stuff. The things that
good.
I think about is I don't have the people skills. I don't
Mm.
have the ability to sell myself, the college, stuff like that. Things that money can't buy, which is part of the reason why I do this is because it's just a broad overall self development tool.
But there are
You
things you
know?
can always learn though. You can always develop them.
Yeah,
You just have
yeah.
to you just have to be willing to do so, or willing to open to the experience of doing that. Like if you want to
Mhm.
shoot portraits, just literally grab a model, go to like Model Mayhem, grab a model, go out and shoot. It's scary. You don't know what's going to happen. Things could go wrong, but that's the whole point. The whole point is you learn and you have fun. That's the point. And you're also at a point right now where there is no pressure or expectation for you to create great work. You can create
Mhm.
and it'll be a disaster and it'll be absolutely fine. You're not going to lose anything. So now is the
Mhm.
time for you to be doing that. Now is the time for you to be experimenting and having fun and doing stuff and just having joy of getting joy out of what you do. And I know you already do that now, but it's just like if there are ways, this is not meant to be a pep talk, but it turned into one. But like if there are ways that you want to expand your practice and you're like, oh cool, I want to shoot maybe more models, or I want to shoot, I don't know, like in different locations, like go and do it now. There's no pressure. Because there will be a point within the next year, next 2 years, where people will pick up on your work and you'll be expected to create a certain type of imagery, or you'll be expected to
Mhm.
do a certain kind of thing. And before you get to that point, have fun, explore your options, figure out who you want to be. Because like for me personally, and I like the fact you said earlier about like you're really interested in the process and the story. Because for me, I'm always interested in the process and the story. Hence the podcast. I'm always interested in why people do what they do, and it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting that you say that because there is definitely a market for that, 100%. And places like magazines like 349 AM and Witness and Nowhere Diary and places like that,
Mhm.
like Cinematica, that have like these incredible photographers being featured all the time, but you never hear their stories and you never see the concepts behind it or the reasons behind it or like just the background and behind the scenes. And I think what you're saying in terms of like showing that process and what your wife said, I think she's actually right in many ways. Because like personally, I would love to see you create a reel. You don't have to even show your face. You can just create a reel where you're talking over your images, why you did a certain thing, why you went to this location, stuff like that.
Also, what we were talking about now, you not really being able to differentiate, sort of
Mm.
digital art that's combined with photos and stuff like that. When you show the process, it kind of relieves all that sort of thing.
And also, you have to remember as well, like photography to the layman, as I like to call them, the general public. Like a photograph is just a moment captured. That's all you've done. That's it. You've literally taken a camera and snapped an image. When actually there is a whole process. There is, you've found a place, you found a scene, you've photographed it, you've considered it, you've edited it, you've made a story out of it. You don't just take an image. It's not just like that. It seems like that and it appears like that, but that's just not the case. So I think the process, showing like how you edit, showing kind of just your general tastes and what you like and what you don't like, even just like your inspirations. There's just like there's so much you can do and so much you can show. I think it's really, really interesting to tap into that. And it's something that I also want to do in my own work, definitely as well. So your advice and you're saying this is making me think, oh, actually, what can I do? But it's
Mm,
just interesting to kind of consider like we're all shooting similar stuff, but we're all coming from very different perspectives. Like, what is your perspective? You know?
mm, yeah.
I don't know. I think that fascinates me personally. So, what have I got here? So, actually, so wait, so do you shoot digitally or with film?
I shoot digital.
And what is your opinion on the whole digital versus film debate?
Well, I don't know what the debate is. Uh,
So,
I love film, but it's just not fast.
hmm,
It's not fast enough feedback for me to get anything out of it.
yeah,
Like I'm in the state of mind where I need instant results. Like that's why I'll go out and shoot for 4 hours, and then no matter what, I'm getting that editing done before I go to sleep because
really,
yes, I need to have it done. I need to.
that's
I can't sleep on
insane.
it.
That's
I want to
insane.
like that event I did with me and my wife. We had like 2,000 images, and I'm sure there was a happy client, but they got all those images back, within 6, 7 hours
That's
because they just
insane.
I can't. So imagine me with film, and
Yeah,
I'm stressing about because I don't have a lot of money. I can't sit there and think about, okay, I gotta get across town on this date when I have the
yeah,
time and pay this money to get it developed by people that I mean I've
yeah,
got roles before and it comes back and I'm like, dude, did you even try with this? Like, and this
yeah,
is this is
yeah.
like $40 down the drain and all this time and I just can't deal with it. There will come a time in my life where I will shoot film,
Hmm.
but for growing and learning, to me, it just doesn't work. I started out on film. That's how I learned in the first place.
Yeah.
So all that stuff like metering and what have you, I learned that already. Now I need the instant feedback so that I can tweak as I go. That's the most important part is the instant feedback.
So that's fascinating to me because I work very differently. So I always shoot a lot of work and then I just leave it. I don't touch it. So right now I've shot loads of stuff this year and I've just literally left it. I'm not going to look at it for a while because I'm going to shoot
Yeah.
more. So the idea of like, because I actually years ago when I first started, I used to do the same thing. I used to shoot loads of images and then edit them the same day and then be like, "Cool, this is done," and then close a book on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think nowadays, and this is maybe some advice to you that I give to you that I got from another photographer called Caffeine Cowboy. Like the idea of like images don't always just have one life; they have several. So just because you've
Mm-hmm.
shot an image today or tomorrow or yesterday and you've edited it and it's done, it's not always fully done because that image may crop up later on in a sequence that might be a lot more fitting. Don't
Yeah.
just be like, cool, the image is done, it's gone, it's edited, let's move on. You always have to remember that photography is timeless to the
Yeah.
extent photography is timeless, and you never know when your past work will actually inform your present work and then inform your future work.
Well, one thing for Christmas, my wife's parents got me a printer, and it's actually like
Oh
a
wow.
really, really good printer. And I've always had a hesitation towards that. Like I said, I would imagine like, okay, printers, every time I've ever dealt with a printer, it's been a hassle.
Hmm.
It seems like you need like a $3,000 printer to even print something remotely good. I had all these preconceived notions that made me not ever want to get the printer, not ever look into that side of it, right?
Yeah.
And I just got very lucky that they happened to get me one, and it's really, really good. And I'm printing images now, and I, I'm a mess. Like I'll get like a pack of 50 papers, and like I said, okay, I'm just gonna print a couple and wait till I get some frames. I've got like 100 prints just sitting here, you know. It's really now I'm starting to be able to go back to that older stuff and be like, okay, yeah, this was a group of like 10 images I shot like 3 months ago. But man, really look at this. I bet you could actually see this little detail when I print it. So I'll just be like, well, let's print it. And so I'm really, and also, like I said, getting more into Twitter and having those sort of storyboard S4 panels, that's really made me look at old stuff and, well, what four images go together? I like telling a little story with the four,
Because that could be,
So I've
so
been doing
what
a
could
lot more of that lately.
yeah, because that's really cool. Because then you could sell if you're going to sell prints, then you can sell like miniature four prints like together, and they could be like a bundle, or like they could be like these four prints go together, or I don't know. That's really cool actually, or even like a mix and match. I don't know. That's really cool. It opens up possibilities for you in the future, and I think I love this idea that you have a printer, and I really would have wanted your printer at some point in the future, like for sure, because I'm building myself a little wall of art, which is funny. And I would love to have one of your pieces on the wall. That'd be incredible. So, do you think that your work translates well online then, because you print it, so you see it in print?
I think my stuff is better on print when you
Hmm.
can see it big. Um, Especially that was one of my main hiccups when I started using the Ricoh GR, the GR3, because as a 28 mil focal length, which for me at the time felt like a little wide, and I felt like taking wider images, especially when you have to crop it to fit properly on Instagram.
Hmm.
I was just like, man, like so many images I take, like, are not even worth posting in this format. And for the longest time, it was very hard to even take a lot of images because that would be the immediate thought of, oh yeah, I know I can make this out, but nobody else can. Um, so like when I first started photography, most people start with like a 50 mil lens, and it's it's kind of perfect. You start out with like a 50 mil lens and you put it wide open and you get that nice blur. And I felt like that stuff is perfect for Instagram. Then whenever I would try, widening, it'd be like, yeah, it's just too small. I don't get how to get this work. And now, if you give me a 50 mil lens, I just want to throw up. Like I feel so claustrophobic. I like it wide, but I still kind of run into that issue where sometimes it just feels like, especially I have an iPhone 13 mini, the little phone. So especially for me, when I'm looking at my own stuff on Instagram or what have you, it's just kind of like, it's like you can't even tell if this is good or not. How does anyone
That's
say it's
true.
good?
That's very true.
I mean, it does give you certain freedoms though, because you could shoot at an extremely high ISO and have a lot of flaws in the image.
Yeah.
But when you put in that little screen, especially with little nice white borders or whatever, that's one thing. It's funny, but it's 100% true. If you see any of my images that have more of a white border, it's because I don't like them as much. It's because I feel like I have to do that to kind of like clean it up a little. Like, all right, but it looks good when you do this, right? But those sort of images I wouldn't print, you know. So
So
it's kind of a double-edged sword. There's a bunch of things on Instagram that I find wouldn't normally work that work great, and vice versa.
that's actually really funny for, well, what you just said is really funny for three different reasons. Firstly, because I actually shoot everything with a 50 mm lens. I actually don't use any of the lens to shoot anything, which is funny,
Yeah,
which is hilarious. Because I should probably
it,
learn.
it was my favorite. It was my favorite, and then I
I
don't know
just
what happened.
I just feel like for me, like I've always shot the 50 mm lens, and it feels weird to shoot with anything else. But that's just my preference. But then I'll just shoot like
Yeah,
landscapes, portraits, everything. But then I don't know. That's a whole conversation. But I think what you said about the idea of like you can shoot stuff that's very flawed and put on Instagram, people won't notice. I think that's very
mhm.
telling because it's just like if somebody came along and was like, "Oh, I want this to print," you'd be like, "Oh, that's not a good idea."
That
But
one.
so that's pretty funny. But I also think that's a really good point in terms of like you can't always trust what you see online because just because it looks
Yeah,
good because it's small doesn't mean it's going to look good when it's large.
and that's one amazing thing now about having this printer is a lot of times I'll just print it just to see it. Like I don't care if I'm going
Hmm.
to keep this. I don't care if I'm wasting paper. I just want to see it. And it's really helped my editing a lot too. Um, because I would just notice certain things like, okay, you think the saturation or what have you is one way, and then you print this out, and you're like, oh, okay, that's not quite exactly what it is. One thing that I'm still kind of struggling with is just the overall darkness. All my screens, I have the brightness turned all the way up,
Yeah.
as bright as they can go. So everything I view when I'm editing or what have you, it's like, yeah, I can see this fine. And I think everyone else can, but a lot of them I'll print and I'm like, oh, yeah, I kind of got to raise this brightness a little, just little things like that.
Dude, that's so funny because that's something I've always struggled with. And until you've just said that now, I've just realized I've never actually thought about that. Like,
Mm,
Because when I edit, my brightness is at full as well, and I typically try to edit when it's dark as well, so that you get like
mm,
maximum effect. But like you're right, every time I print something, it's too dark, and I'm like, oh, but this is really dark. So that's a really good
yeah.
point. I need to learn how to not do that. That's a really good point,
I got
actually.
a little editing secret for you.
What's this?
Yeah. One thing I really like to do, I don't know how I discovered this, but I'll edit everything in Lightroom, right? And so,
Hmm.
I told you I edit everything on a iPad, right?
Hmm.
So one thing I like to do, and I might not keep this adjustment every time, um, but when I'm done editing in Lightroom and I've exported it, so the photo's sitting in my camera roll, it's already edited. I like using Apple's built-in editing software on top of it,
Hmm.
just clicking the auto button and seeing what it suggests. Because
Yeah.
I don't know if this is true, but I imagine it's geared for screens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I always find that it does just a little subtle something to where sometimes it doesn't even look like it's doing anything. And then in that case, it's almost kind of like, all right, I must be good. And
Yeah.
sometimes it just makes it overly bright or what have you. But I find a lot of times it's actually very smart in what it does. And a lot of times it feels like it's a little kind of finishing touch on a lot of my photos. So I don't know if
Okay.
anyone's ever tried that. It just works surprisingly well.
No, but I should try that. That's not a bad call. And also, it's just interesting in terms of like these small little things you don't think about when you're editing, but when you print your work with the eye to be able to print your work, it's going to give
Uh,
you such a better idea of like color, of saturation, of brightness, of just kind of like the final finished look of your work, as opposed to just being like, oh, I
mhm,
create these images and post them online. It's that you print them. There's such a defining quality to that.
mhm.
I'm actually quite jealous of that, to be fair. I would love to to print my work on demand whenever I wanted to. And actually, now you
Yeah.
said that, I might actually just make some prints and work. Why not? That'd be pretty cool, actually. That'd be really cool, actually. Because there's something about seeing your work as like a physical object, knowing that you've created this.
Yeah. For me, it's one thing I was telling my wife after I got it and after I kind of spent a day ironing out all the kinks and I was getting results that I was actually happy with. I was like, I just feel, I don't know how to explain it. I just feel complete. I
Yeah.
feel like this thing I'm doing is real now.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I'm not just some guy at work saying I like taking photos and at
Yeah.
home there's an iPad with a bunch of photos on it. Now it feels like, well, if I really want to, I can bring this. I have this idea in my head. I was telling my wife, it's like I want to be the print bandit. And she's like, what does that mean? I was like, well, even if I don't sell this stuff, I think it'd be fun to just go to some of these places that I've taken images of and just leave a print, leave a framed print somewhere.
Oh, that's
Just
cool.
uh, uh, just a way of kind of like, hey, I want to be seen. I want people to ask, what is this? What is this thing I'm seeing all over the place? So for a local business, I actually that one I told you that I shot the event for,
Yeah.
I had a really nice photo that I had taken about a year ago in the fog of their building. They actually have a mural on their building by Shepard Ferry. Do you know who that guy is?
I do indeed, no Shepherd Ferry, of course.
Yeah, he did the mural for them at this building, and I kind of realized I was like, wow, it's so funny. Me and my wife watched a documentary forever ago about this guy, and he was doing that exact same thing, just going out stenciling his stuff everywhere, and people start talking. And now
Yes.
here I am presenting a framed photo, a 13 by 19, to this business where they have the mural done by that guy. It just felt like everything kind of clicked. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And they were thrilled to have it, and they might hang it up or something like that. But it's not really the point. The point was just to be able to get my stuff out there, money or no money. Just here, have this, and see somebody appreciate to have it. I felt like it was a good kind of seed to plant, something to do.
I really respect that a lot because you're right. It's nice to be able to have something to show for your time and be like, oh, here you go, here's something that I've made. It doesn't matter whether you get
Mhm.
money for it, it doesn't matter whether that, it's successful or not. It's like, here's something I made. I think that's very important. I think that's at the root of all art because it's like making
So
something.
yeah, so in the future, if you think about me, you don't think uh, I don't know, whatever multitude of negative things there could be. You think, oh, that's that artist guy. He made this print.
Hmm.
He did, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Like
that's a huge reason why I do that.
you're almost like trying to define yourself without tying yourself down to a certain role, but you're like, this is what I want to be known for.
Yeah,
But in a way that makes you able to kind of branch out to other things and kind of be like loose in terms of what you want to do.
yeah, because it's funny being a photographer. Forever, I didn't even like calling myself that because I do a very specific sort of photography. So let's say we're at a family event uh, and people want photos taken. Nobody even thinks about me when they hand the camera phone off. Like they don't think, oh, Chris is the photographer.
Hmm.
And I always felt really bad about that. Like
Yeah.
I don't know how to quite explain it, but I just felt like a fraud. It goes back to that fear of
Hmm.
tell you about posing people or whatever. It's like, man, I'm a photographer. This is my passion, and yet the people closest to me, it's like they don't even see me as such. It's like this secret thing that I do. So now that I have the ability to print things, I have this overwhelming sense of like, I want everybody to have this stuff so that when you think of me, you attach that thing to me, you
Hmm.
know? And I don't know how important that is, but it felt important. Uh, and that's something that's definitely, finally starting to happen. And I'm happy with it.
I'm really happy because that sounds absolutely incredible. What is your creative process like? And are there any particular routines you have that help you focus on creating work?
My creative process really, I used to think, okay, I really have to get myself in the right headspace. I have to be in a good mood. And ultimately, I would go months without taking a single photo, And I'm the type of person, I'm listening to podcasts constantly, all sorts of self help things, all that, you know. Uh, and I think it was Travis Barker actually. It was on a podcast, and he said, uh, that it's not about motivation; it's about just getting out there to do it. And then also listening to like Stephen Pressfield books and stuff like that. Like The War of Art was a huge help for me. Um, about just putting yourself in position for the muse or what have you, however you call it, whatever you think about it. It's just putting yourself in position for that stuff to come. Because, like I said, a lot of times I'm not in a good mood. I don't feel like doing it. I don't feel creative. I feel like I'm out taking the exact same images over and over, just kind of
Yes.
aimlessly. But sometimes I'll be out there and it could be a random thought of some kind of feeling just comes over me, and all of a sudden I'm looking at the world differently. Like my emotional coloring changes. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it gets worse. One thing that I do, if ever I'm kind of in a mental sort of drought, what have you, is I'll watch good movies and I'll take the time to like, okay, for the next 2 nights, each night I'm gonna watch some kind of movie that I know is, amazing. And I'll just kind of subconsciously start seeing things through that more cinematic way. That's one thing that I find that I have to do. It might be as infrequent as once a month. It might be every day for a month, but movies play a huge role in kind of influencing how I see things. Yeah, I'd say movies are the number one inspiration for my photography.
See, I think that's really, really interesting because obviously, you know, films are made from photographs. Films are moving photographs. And like, have you ever considered creating video or like kind of using more moving image in your work?
Yeah, but you want to talk about that feeling of like when you immediately think of something and you immediately think of all the obstacles and reasons why you can't.
Yes.
That is probably the biggest one.
Okay.
Um, and it's sad because, I come from that skateboarding world where all their greatest videos are the more sort of just grab a camera, point and shoot.
Hmm.
And that's some of the most inspiring stuff to me. One of my favorite movies of all time is Blair Witch Project because of that reason. I
Yeah.
love the idea that they just did it. I hate that I'm blanking on the guy's name, but the Wong Kar Wai movies that I like. His name's Christopher Doolin, I think, something like that. I hate that I'm forgetting it. But he talks about that too, about it being a sort of guerrilla style, about just pick it up and do it. Like you don't gotta have all the stuff, whatever, just do it. Um, and with video, I mean, deep in my heart, I feel like that's what I want to do sometimes. But it's also um, when it comes to that mentality, that's my biggest hurdle. Um, it's not just just do it.
I,
I always think of like, well, I don't know how these settings are. I don't know what the shutter
yeah.
speed's supposed to be doing. So you need an ND filter, but can you do just all those questions? And then I'm just like, I don't want to do it. I just want to go take pictures. But definitely, it is something I'm interested in.
I think video is actually really hard. I think making a decent video, making
Yeah,
like a decent video is really hard. And I actually have a lot of respect for a lot of YouTubers that make these really gorgeous, like even just like quote unquote content, but it's like all like, them shooting at night or just like really gorgeous, like kind of night films. They're just really nice because end of the day, it's not easy. And we look
yeah.
at that and we take it for granted thinking, oh yeah, cool, that looks nice, well done. And it's actually like that took a lot of time and effort. Same with photography.
You know,
We look at images really quickly. Yeah, it took a lot of effort to create them.
yeah. It's funny because I've been to a few art museums with my wife, and I always hate it because, like I said, a lot of times I'm just in this sort of mood where I can look at all this great art and feel literally nothing, you know.
Hmm.
And it always kind of scared me. It's like, how am I an artist when like a lot of times I'm just so kind of null to everything. Um, and I started like not liking going to museums and looking at art because it felt like something was missing in my brain, like that stopped me from seeing it and appreciating it. And one of the things that actually like I feel because I would go to the art museum and sometimes you see people looking at a piece and they're crying to themselves or something
Hmm.
like that, right? And I'd be so jealous of that feeling. Do you know that director? I think his name's Alfonso Cuarón.
I don't
He,
think
he
so.
did he did like the third Harry Potter. That's a bad example, but he did like Gravity, Children of Men,
Oh no, I know the
uh,
films. I know the films, but I don't know the
Roma.
director.
But if you know him, all his movies are like these sort of masterpieces in the way that he'll do like a 17-minute single take shot.
Oh yeah, stuff like that.
So
Absolutely.
I watched that movie Roma that he did,
Yeah.
and I was just sobbing the entire time watching it because I've never been so in awe of all the little things that, and one of the things that I have to realize is that that's not one guy doing all this. And in my brain, it always feels like that's how it has to be. You're the guy
Hmm.
that does everything. And when you watch this like astounding sort of feat, your brain likes to think like, man, how did this guy do this? And it's like this guy didn't do this. He has a whole team around him that has taken years to make connections and relationships and find people that are good at this, someone that's good at this, and it's a collaboration of that. So when I look at video, it feels so daunting, so daunting.
But
But
that's
yeah, I
actually
do.
that's a really good point though, because you're right. We often, actually, we very much often attribute
Mhm.
a film to the director, but we don't think about the cinematographer. We don't think about the colorist. We don't think about the actors and actresses necessarily. We don't think about people who wrote the storyline. We don't think about the
And,
individual parts. We look at the whole.
and when you imagine doing it, you imagine
It's just you
the
doing
hurdles.
it.
Yeah, you always think of it that way. And it's like, man, how could anybody do this? Well, they can't. They need a team, they need people.
That's a really, actually, a really interesting point, actually. And I actually have a few good friends who actually I'm going to send that to and be like, by the way, you do realize you can't do this because you need a team. But it's true though. Or at least if you don't have the team, you at least need the advice and the guidance from people who know or who have a better
Yeah.
understanding. And like, I think that'd be really cool, actually. Now you've said that, it'd be really great to set up some kind of collaborative like workshop or something where we get photographers who are interested in video together to shoot a film or something like that. That'd be really cool, actually.
Um, when I was younger, I had a phone. It was like a little Nokia phone. It wasn't a flip phone. It was kind of all one piece, like all the buttons and the little tiny screen are all just one little piece, you know.
Hmm.
And everyone at the time had just got like iPhones had just come out, like, and I've got this little tiny weird phone that can't do anything. Um, but one of the things it could do that, and it was kind of one of my first times ever doing anything creative consistently, is it had a video camera, and it's like less than a megapixel, probably like
Yeah.
terrible quality, but it had a feature that fascinated me. The feature was you press a button and it pauses the recording. It doesn't end the recording; it just pauses it. So
Oh,
when you hit it again, you're
very soon.
still it's still the same video, but you can make cuts on the fly. You don't really
That's
all you gotta do is
interesting.
press the button. And nothing else I saw did that. And it's funny because Vine ended up coming out like
Hmm.
much later and stuff like that. And I always felt like I was ahead of the game on that. Like I was doing that all day, every day, just making these little videos of like it could be something as simple as, oh, there's someone inside against the window, and I'm filming them, and then I pause and I go outside and I can see their silhouette from the outside, and then I start recording there. So in the video, it just looks like one fluid, just, and it was the first time it felt like my brain was just firing, like, okay, I could try this, I could try this. And I was doing video, and there was no sort of caring about the specs, anything. That's
Yeah.
probably the most free that I ever felt creatively. And I always think about that. Um, but it's just hard to live. It's just hard to live that sometimes. So you could even get a brand new camera, go take photos, like, oh, I see how better image stabilization will help here, and blah blah blah. It feels very hard to tap back into that. But I don't care. I'm just having fun. I'm using what I got, and the thing is interesting because of the lack of. That's one thing that director for all those Ron Carl movies, the cinematographer. That was one thing he said is the lack of tools is the product. Like that's what you're seeing. The lack of whatever is what makes something what it is. Uh, so it's not about having all the best. It's the lack of that gets you to improvise, that gets you to create something.
You know what? That's actually, again, that's a really good point because I think two things. I think one, that we're having an aesthetic where like a whole kind of very low quality is kind of coming back in terms of like, people getting a lot of photographers I know actually nowadays are buying like, really cheap cameras, like old school cameras, like really just cheap digital cameras and shooting stuff.
That's exactly why it's so popular because it feels accessible.
Exactly. And but then at the same time, but you're right, give you, you can buy yourself a £10,000 camera tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't mean you're going to create great work.
Yeah.
It's about knowing what you're doing with the tools you've got. And if the tools you've got are not high quality, that doesn't mean you can't create great images.
There's a couple artists that I follow, like on Twitter and stuff like that, where they're like in India, places like that, and they'll shoot with like an old phone.
Hmm.
And one of the things I notice is that they really, really have to come up with their own style, their own editing flair, because they're having to so heavily make up for the fact that that their camera doesn't have the greatest specs or whatever.
Hmm.
But I feel like that's the absolute best way to do it. I feel like I kind of had that same sort of process because I was so scared of going out and taking photos. When I did take a photo, I'd spend days and days editing it because it was the only sort of thing I could do that was practicing the medium because I was too scared to go out and actually do it. So that's how, and I feel like that was really good for me because now I have my own style of editing and I have a distinct look through my edits that I was forced to develop. And I think you get that same thing with limitations in tech is, you got to kind of find a way to make up for it. And I think that's a good thing. Because then when you do have the proper tools, it's like, oh man, how did they get, like, I just got a full frame camera. It's my first one ever. And I couldn't stop thinking this feeling of like, how could they give me this power? You know, like now I know how to use it. If I would have got this year one, two, three, whatever, it would have just been like, I don't get why my pictures aren't better. But now that I'm older and more experienced, you know, I had a very clear understanding. This isn't going to make my pictures better. But I can feel the things that I'm able to do that I wasn't able to do before. And it's nothing crazy, but, you know, I'm glad that I learned those lessons and I can appreciate it now rather than it just spiraling into more gear obsession, you know?
I absolutely love your perspective. I think what you're saying is so relatable, and I think it's very valuable actually, because I feel like you're right. Like you're very right. Like now you know that now you've got a full frame camera, you know what to do with it. It's because
Mhm.
I remember when so I did a photography degree, and when I was at
Mhm.
university, I had
Yeah,
acquaintances that brought the latest Canon camera. They brought like a Canon Mark III at that time, I think it was, and they
yeah.
spent like £5,000 on a new camera, but they'll never use that camera. They've never used it since. Because it's not
Yeah.
about having the best specs and being like, oh, look at me, I'm fancy. It's about knowing what you can do and knowing your limitations. And then when you feel ready, you feel like your work needs that
Mm.
extra push, then buy that camera. I think I don't know. I just really value your perspective. I think everything you've said so far is just so relatable, and it's kind of really funny because some of it's very opposite to what I do, which I really love, and just some of it really aligns. And I just really like that you're honest. Like I really appreciate that. So in terms of your work, so I'm kind of curious because obviously you shoot at night. So like, how
Mhm.
do you stay safe?
Well, like I said, I'm kind of controlled by fear. It's one of the main reasons why I do what I do is because like I said, it's just a broad tool of kind of fixing all these things that I don't like about myself. And a lot of my actions are heavily dictated by, about a year, 2 years ago, just the idea of having a conversation with you like this
Hmm.
would have been unfathomable. At the same time, that's kind of my biggest advantage when it comes to being safe. Like I'm gonna be safe because I'm scared of everything out there. You know, I don't
Hmm.
take chances. You know, if I'm on a road that there hasn't been a car in 5 minutes and all of a sudden a car comes on their slow, okay, it's time to go. I'm not staying there. I'm not taking a chance. Like, and
Really?
I really, yeah, I'm very, like I said, I'll be on a back road at 3 in the morning, and if the car's behind me, I'll pull off the first chance I get because I want to be alone. I don't want anyone around me, you know. Especially with my job, I'm working with people all day.
Yeah.
Like when I go at night, like that's for me. Like
Yeah.
I don't want anybody around. I just want to feel like the world is just mine, you know. Uh, so that fear is what keeps me safe. You know, I just look at everything very. Oh, they're up to no good. What is that person doing? What is it? Even though it's funny because those perceptions are what stopped me from working out at night myself because
Yeah.
all I could picture is people thinking the same way as me. Like those
Yeah.
judgments you have become, they become your cage themselves.
Hmm.
So I would look at everyone like as if it's the same thing as when someone wants to go to the gym and they're so conscious and they're like, everyone thinks this about me, but then they go and they realize, oh, everybody's just like me, just kind of worried about themselves and not
Yeah.
really
Oh
thinking
yeah.
about me, you know? Um, but yeah, I am aware, like, especially in the areas I'm going to, I'm going to look nuts standing out here taking pictures of like, I know that people would drive by and be like, oh, I get what he's doing. No, they're not going to get it. They're going to think something's wrong. So I'd rather just be discreet, but not in such an overtop way that I look creepy, like I'm looking around. Like a lot of times I get into sort of a flow where I could care less who's looking at me. I could care less what's going on, but I don't allow that to continue for too long because I have to be alert. Like I can't risk, if I were to get all my stuff stolen, that'd be really, really terrible. It'd be really hard to recover from that. So I think about stuff like that, and I just try to stay as safe as I can. Um, but I do feel like I'm a little too overly safe sometimes. Uh, I, talking about images you wish you got. it's always stuff like that. It's always stuff like, man, why can't I just go walk around the city? It's like, well, you can't. You know, like you wish you could. You wish the world was one way, but that's not reality. You know what I mean?
I, I think also because you're in America, I think it's very different over there than it is over here. I think here, I could walk around a neighborhood that might not be like the best. And yes, okay, I would be very nervous or very, not nervous, but I'd be conscious about it. But I think in
Yeah.
America, like everybody has guns. You don't even know what people are thinking.
Especially the places I'm at, like um, they're like kind of more rural areas
Mm,
where, and I'm in the South of the United
mm.
States,
Oh
which
yeah,
is,
of course.
you know, yeah, it's not. I'm very careful. I'm very careful.
So it's funny because I have a friend called Jesse Tate who hasn't been on Instagram for quite a long time, but he said the same thing when we spoke when I
He
spoke to
does
him.
Dustfield magazine, right?
Yeah, he said the same thing. Like he's very conscious that
Mm-hmm.
when he's out shooting, like how you look. Because for me, like I kind of don't really care too much because I don't know. It's just like if people are going to stop me and ask what I'm doing, that's fine. I'd rather you didn't, but that's fine. But at the same time, like I'm still going to take the pictures anyway, you know? So it's kind
Yeah.
of like I don't really care too much. If you want to have a conversation, that's cool. But
At night, where I'm going, if somebody's
yeah.
asking me anything, it's already too late. Like I'm not trying to have any kind of conversation with anybody. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I think for me, like I just don't like being disrupted because like you're in the zone. And like for me, like if
Mhm,
I'm out and I've got a camera in my hand, like I just want to be left alone. I'm happy to have a
mhm.
conversation, but I could be shooting in that time. Like I'm here to like I don't have all the time in the world. I've got a job to go to. So it's like I've set time aside to do this. Please leave me alone. But
Mhm.
I also feel like sometimes though, sometimes talking to people whilst you're shooting or you're out and about actually can lead to different perspectives on your own work. And it kind of gives it goes two ways. It can kind of make it either makes you look really suspicious or people will be really interested. I feel like that's the kind of two polar opposites. There's always a middle ground, but more often than not, people are either really suspicious and want to know what you're doing, or they're just really interested in what you're doing. Because if you see somebody
Yeah.
photographing at night, you'd probably stop them, or maybe not.
No. No. I
No,
don't
I
want to know what.
would.
Like I said, I just look at it like they're up to no good, even though they could
Oh,
be doing the exact same thing as
I
me. I'm just
oh
like,
if I see anybody with the camera in their hand, I'm asking questions. I mean, that's what I do
yeah,
anyway. But I don't know. I just think it's I don't know. I think it's nice to take the time to ask people what they're doing, and even though, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's nice to strike a conversation with people because you never know where that's going to lead.
yeah, I've done that. Out shooting in the day, like if I'm walking around like a
Yeah.
downtown area and it's populated. But like I said, when I'm taking pictures, it's like I'm in a rural sort of area. Like
Mm,
there's nobody doing anything. If I see another person in person, like it already feels like something's wrong. Like this shouldn't
yeah.
be happening because it's 3 in the morning and we're in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean?
I mean, yes. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, 3 in the morning in the middle of like rural America, definitely. I'd be as much as I'd love to be there. I'm a bit like probably wouldn't also like to be there.
Yeah.
But then I don't know. It depends on the area though. But like you're right. I think it's just very different. I feel like here in the UK, I think it's very like I could go out at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd probably see nobody. Actually, no, wait. Like I walk to work at 5 in the morning and there's hardly anybody about. So it's like then again, America's a bigger
Yeah.
place. I don't know. It's very interesting because I would love to experience that at some point. I think that'd be really fun, which sounds weird probably to a lot of people, but I think that'd be fun.
It's funny. That's one of the best compliments I ever got, but it always makes me laugh. Someone commented on one of my photos and they're like, I wish I could take pictures like this, but I live in Europe and we don't have anything as aesthetically pleasing as this. And I was like, dude, I literally took a picture of a dollar store in the fog. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing special about it. But I was flattered that somehow the way I captured it, they're like, man, we don't have cool stuff like this here. But everyone around here looks at that place as an eyesore and wants it gone,
Yes.
and so do I. I
Yes.
mean, I want it gone too. But I love the fact that it's able to take a picture of it, and people are like, man, that's such an aesthetic place. I'm like, really? Because it's an eyesore to everybody else, including me. But I'm glad that I was able to at least get something good out of it.
So there's a question that I didn't actually put on this list that I normally ask for my called American friends. So, like, the idea of Americana, the idea of America itself, like as somebody from the UK, like for me, it's very fascinating because it's a huge, vast place. But like, do you ever feel that it's very cliche? Like, for instance, like that person was like, we don't have anything that in Europe, when actually they probably can find something either similar or something that's more distinctive to Europe. But like, do you ever feel like your work is like heavily tied with the kind of idea of being cinematic because it is America?
Um, I I don't think it has to do with America. I think it has to do with like low income areas. Period.
Hmm.
One of the things I'm most fascinated about is I'm sure you've heard this sentiment throughout your life that you never see kids out playing together anymore. They're not riding
Yeah.
bikes. They're not doing all the things we did as a kid, out running through the woods, stuff like that. And that is true
Yeah.
until you go into lower income areas, and all of a sudden, this project here has a community playground space where there's bad things going on there, but there's also all these good things that we think is lost, and it feels like, um, for whatever reason, it feels like you see that sort of stuff more the lower the income. And it's kind of that exact same thing we were just talking about with gear. It's like if you start off getting all the best gear, all the whatever, you kind of don't develop this style or what have you. And I find the same thing to be true. You'll never see me riding around a rich area looking for interesting photographs because to me there is nothing interesting. It's like you have the money to make nice things and you made nice things. When I'm riding around lower income areas, everything feels improvised. There's a board on this window. This light is a different color than the other ones. This one, like there's interest there. Everything's not copy and paste. There's a improvisation that creates just more interesting looking things. You know, old cars still exist. We're not all
Yeah.
driving around in the newest car. These are cars that people have to maintain for years. And if that car messes up, their whole livelihood's messed up. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's the same thing. Like if you go to Cuba, you'll see all these American classic cars that they have had to improvise and keep good for over 100 years, 50, 60 years. It's fascinating. And once you go to a place where everyone is living nice, you lose all that interesting stuff, I find.
That's a really good distinction. That's like a really good distinction. That's a really good distinction because it makes me think about like just because you said like the idea like everything looks improvised and like that's such a as I've never thought about it that way actually, but now you said that I'm like that actually makes so much sense in terms of like for instance like boarded up windows or like streets that haven't been swept or like graffiti and signs half ripped and stuff like all the stuff that fascinates me and that I
You know,
find captivating. Like it's all because it's not proper, it's not tidy, it's not neat, it's not organized.
yeah.
And I think
And whenever I imagine like a writer or something, like you're reading a book and they're explaining a place, all those descriptions in my mind, the ones that come to me are the improvised things. Like, oh, I went to a cafe and there was a sweet and low packet under the wobbly chair. Like they're always explaining these sort of little intricacies that make that place interesting. And when you hear about it, that place kind of comes alive. And with my photos, it's like, oh, look, here, it's all right there. You can sit and stare at it for a while and, you can see those improvised things.
I guess it's about looking for the character of a place,
Yeah.
which I'm totally typing down because that's going to have to be like something I'm going to write up at some point. I'm writing this down. Um, yeah, that's such a fascinating concept. Like looking for the character of a place rather than looking at the place itself.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. I'm going to be thinking about it for a very long time. That's really fascinating, actually. Um, so, how do you make sure you don't become bored of your own work?
Well, I'm not sure really, because like I said, it always feels kind of random. Um, Sometimes I do feel just completely bored with it, but that's when I'll kind of watch movies, whatever, listen to different music, try to just start seeing things differently. And sometimes I'm gonna be bored until I just start feeling different. And sometimes that different is not good. I feel bad, but it's different enough to where I know that the images are going to be different, even if I point and shoot the exact same thing. I can feel that shift in my consciousness, and I want to go see what comes out. You know, the result might be I ride around depressed and just not in the mood and get nothing, or I might get 5 images I'm not particularly proud of, but it will be different. And through doing that process, I will start to feel better. The pendulum will come back. I'll eventually make something I'm proud of, and then it will start over. You know.
Rightio. So a question for you would be then, would you still create your work if nobody saw it?
I mean, I think I would. It wouldn't go much further than just kind of a sort of curiosity thing, like take a picture here and there, fiddle with it. Yeah, if nobody saw it, no, I don't think there's any way I would do it. Yeah, I don't think I would because that's one of the things is building the ego, you know. Not very confident, all the sort of typical things I heard many times. But getting feedback on my work, I'm the type of person, like when I was a kid, I was terrible in school, but once I started getting positive reinforcement, all of a sudden I'm on a streak. I want to keep this going. I want to, you know. So that's one of the main reasons I do it, is to kind of have like a positive feedback loop to keep me feeling good about myself. Because sometimes, you know, like I said, it can shift to where I feel terrible about myself. I have no confidence whatsoever. I feel like everything's terrible. And then I'll get a couple people, you know, give me some praise or whatever. And it's like, oh, I want to keep doing this. I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing a good job. That's my sort of positive reinforcement I look to. You know, there's a lot of downsides to that, but that's just how it is for me. You know, like I want to be loved. I want to be admired. I want, you know.
The thing is that you are doing a good job, though. That's the thing. Like you, like truly, like you are, like genuinely, you are doing an incredibly cool thing, because it's just like you're creating something for yourself, and I think you can't get any more better than that, because you're creating something for yourself. You know, whether it fails or not, you're still doing like you're putting yourself out there. You're making the effort. You're putting the time in. You're creating something that is evidence for your time on this planet. You know, it means it's more than just, oh, this is a nice image. It's like, this is a documentation of your life. This is a documentation of your feelings. This is a documentation of you as a person. You never know who's going to see this work. Like, you just don't know what opportunities will come from it. And yes, you could squirrel it away on a hard drive. And yes, you could, you know, keep it for yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that if you fancy it. So I always think it's just like, release out into the world, see what happens. Don't have any expectations, and you'll be absolutely fine. That's my opinion of like posting work. So if you could shoot anywhere in the world, where would you like to shoot?
Japan.
Oh, good call.
Yeah. Japan just seems, that feeling you were describing about how you think it might be different being in Europe, like people don't really care as much if you're out. So Japan feels like the ultimate version of that. You know? And also just how they seem like a more society built way more around respect and kind of keeping to yourself, and they seem so much more introverted. Like, even when I would watch skate videos where, you know, one of the cliche types of footage to have in a skate video is like, oh, look at us getting kicked out of this spot, you know, which I always hated, even when I was younger. I was like, can't just be not like, why is this cool to be like, we're getting kicked out, we're rebels, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When they would go to not just Japan, but just Asian countries in general, it's like the security guards are not like here. They're not throwing you around. They're like doing an X sign with their hands, asking you politely, you know. I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by the idea that I can walk around anywhere and have zero fear. I would love that, you know, to just truly not think like, oh my God, I should not be doing this, to be somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you can just walk around and do what you want to do and not have to worry about crime, basically.
Yeah, true. That's very true. Because I was going to say you should come over to England, but even definitely certain parts of England, particularly if it's a place you don't know as well, that's also the thing. Like, you're going to locations you might not even be familiar with. and it's
Mhm.
like it's very easy to be like, oh no, everything will be fine, but like you're going to be nowhere near from home if things
Yeah.
don't go very right, and it's kind of like it's a risk you take. I think people don't really understand like it's a huge risk, and you're out with expensive equipment as well.
Mhm.
So it's
And it's funny because sometimes I wonder, like, if I think this about a place like Japan, but I've never even been to like New York City,
hmm.
which is here, you know.
Yeah, but America is
I
a huge place.
Yeah, but I imagine like, okay, I'm sitting here thinking about being in Japan, and oh wow, I have no self conscious fears anymore because people are not. I guarantee I would get there and I'd be overwhelmed. The
Hmm.
same as I am just driving around empty streets here. I'm still overwhelmed. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But in my mind, it seems like, man, I wouldn't have to be scared there. And also, I love walking. I would much rather walk than drive. Like, I hate most of the places in America you have to drive. And I just hate that. I would much rather be in a place where you just kind of walked everywhere. I think that's more ideal.
Come
Uh,
over to
and
England.
the places around me that are like that, they seem like, okay, everything is infinitely more expensive. Everything is a hassle.
Hmm.
Everything you do. And I think it would still be like that. But for some reason, my brain tells me that Japan is like this sort of utopia where, like, oh, everything works how it's supposed to and blah, blah, blah. But I guarantee I'd get there and I'd be overwhelmed, especially with the amount of people.
Yeah, but I say it'll be yeah. The amount of people would be insane. It'd be a very beautiful place to photograph, but it depends. Like if you want like empty, but then again, I guess not because you can always find that though. But you can always find this kind of imagery. It's not like it's not
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
Actually, that'd be Japan would be super interesting. It'd be yeah, yeah, it'd be interesting. I'd definitely be a bit cliched though. I don't know. I kind of almost feel like it would be. And actually, there is a photographer that I'm going to send you that actually does shoot in Japan, and his work is really really cool. Um, actually, there's two. Give me 1 second. There's another one as well.
And
Uh,
that's another fascinating part of it, though, is, I see what you're saying about the images from there being cliche, but I just have this sort of, I don't know, maybe like an egotistical sort of thing of like, but I bet mines won't, you know?
Yeah, it's true though. No,
I
I
bet
said
mine.
that. No, you're right. I said that, and then they're like, yeah, but it's going to be your perspective though. So it won't be cliche because
Yeah,
it'll be your perspective. It's not like you're going to the touristy areas and photographing, like something really touristy. It's like you're going to find the character. You're going to understand the place itself.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny. Every time I've ever been on a vacation, like with family and stuff, it's like they'll all be taking photos of whatever local thing, and they're all they're all wondering like, why am I not taking a photo of it? And it would kind of
Mm,
add to that feeling I told you about. It's like I don't think
mm.
people in my immediate vicinity even consider me a photographer because it's
I,
like, well, how's he a photographer? We went to these mountains in this famous train that everyone was snapping. He didn't even look at it, you know?
because you're interested in different things. Your viewpoint as a photographer is very different, and that's not a bad thing. I think what you really need is you need, and this is actually a question I'm going to ask you in a second, but you need like a community or people that you can either hang out with or talk to that are within your vicinity that understand the way you kind of view the world. Because I feel like sometimes being a photographer or being any kind of creative can be quite lonely if you're surrounded by people who don't understand, because it makes you feel like, oh, what am I really doing? Or like, why am I so odd? Because I'm doing something that other people don't really seem to understand. And it can be quite a jarring experience, I personally have found, and also think that a lot of people find. So it can be like you feel like the odd one out.
Yeah, exactly. But
So I think,
at the same time, I really kind of strive for that feeling too. You know, it's kind of it's like I want to be unique, but I want to be loved at the same time.
mm,
Yeah. So yeah,
I mean, do you feel like you're a part of a larger art community?
no, yeah, I'm not sure why, but I just don't. A lot of it is probably uh, from my own sort of like not really reaching out to a lot of people. I'm starting to get better at it, like I said, through Twitter. Twitter is something I've really been focusing on. I don't know if you want to open this whole can of whatever conversation, but that whole NFT world, the whole Web3 world, I'm fascinated by
Mm,
it because that's an introvert's dream, you know? That's an introvert's dream to be able to create stuff and sell it purely digitally. And, you know, like that stuff's really fascinating to me. It's very confusing. I don't see the
Hmm.
value
Hmm.
in NFTs,
Yeah.
but it's something that I am working. You'll never see anything on Instagram from me about, oh, I have this NFT listed on this marketplace or whatever. But it is something I've started to do
Hmm.
because I've just been slowly observing that community. At first, I didn't like it because it felt like the community felt false. It felt like a big, for lack of a better term, felt like a big circle jerk. Like,
Hmm.
you like my stuff and share my stuff, and I'll do the same. And you buy one of my things, I'll buy one of yours, and then we'll tell everyone that this person just bought my thing, I just bought theirs, and a lot of uh, a lot of marketing sort of things like false scarcity. False scarcity is one of the number one things I see in our world today. Of, you want these shoes, you got to enter a raffle for them. Everyone wants to go to this store because there's always a line out the door. With no
Hmm.
knowledge of if the thing's good or not. Just the only thing you're bombarded with is the scarcity of the thing, and the scarcity is totally falsified. And that's what I feel a lot of that world is. But as I dive deeper, I'm like, oh no, this is the future. That is what the art world is. Period. This is just a new form of that. And so I'm slowly starting to kind of become a part of a lot of community over there in that sort of world, but it does feel like a disconnected world, like a different thing. Like Twitter feels like a totally different thing than Instagram or anything else. But I've really been enjoying it lately. I've actually sold so far. I listed my first ever NFT, and I sold two of them so far. And
Oh
it's
wow.
just unreal to me. Like, I'm going to work, I've beat my head over this computer trying to figure it out. Like, this stuff is so confusing, and it feels like the ultimate, like, um, oh, all this is confusing for the sake of being confusing.
Yeah, of course. No, yeah,
But
it's yeah.
but but I go from that feeling to, okay, I've got my thing listed, I've got my little crypto wallet, all this stuff. I've spent all this time amassing all these followers and putting my work out there. And now here's the moment of truth. Let me put my thing out there. I think I did it right, but I'm still not sure. And then I'm at work, and so far, all of a sudden, later in the day, it's like, wow, I've made $40 off this little
Hmm.
effort that I put in my own home. And it's stuff that I created. Like I said, it's hard for me to see the value. Like, yeah, you bought an NFT, a JPEG of my thing. It's like, man, I really don't know what value you're getting out of it. But that might be just a generational sort of thing. It's something I'm trying
Yeah.
to understand more. But that sort of feeling is too powerful to me to not pursue.
Yeah. Okay.
If that makes sense.
That does make sense, but there's a good
Yeah.
that's a very good perspective on it because I don't really know much about NFTs and it's not something I've really delved into.
But like I said, from what I do see, some of the people in that world, in that space, are so insanely talented that
Hmm.
that's kind of the driving force for me. It's like, oh, this isn't a gimmick. There's something real behind this, like funded by real talent. And
Okay.
even if it's just a supplementary thing, it's something that I'm going to keep looking into and pursuing.
Like at the end of the day, like, why not? It's not going to hurt, is it? At the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what has creating art taught you about yourself?
Uh, well, I think one of the main things it's taught me is that progression will come.
Hmm.
We talk about the instant feedback, all that stuff. Like, I am the type of person that I'll study something religiously, and then I want to feel like I'm all of a sudden an expert at it. Like, any sort of delayed gratification, delayed whatever is so foreign to me. Like, I feel like I can't think too far ahead. I have a really hard time doing that. Like, my wife will ask me stuff like, where do you want to be in 5 years or whatever? Growing up, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always hated all those questions. It's like,
Hmm.
how do I know? You with art, it's taught me that there is a progression. To trust that, if you show up, things will progress. You will learn. You will create things. It will slowly change over time. Um, I'd say that's the number one thing. It's not is to not expect an instant result and to just keep showing up and things will come. That's probably the number one thing I've learned.
That's a great thing to have learned, though. I think that's actually a really positive thing to have learned, though. It takes a pressure of you having to be like, oh, I need to have everything now.
It's like, well, it might take a year.
Mm.
Before that was unfathomable. It was like a year, then I'm not going to do it. And now it's just like, well, what are you going to do besides that? If you don't do it and just sit and wait and be patient, you're just going to be idling. And then 10 years is going to pass by and you've done nothing. That has happened to me in the past.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
So when I say it's a great lesson, I really mean it's one of the greatest lessons I could learn, because that totally changes everything. It's like, okay, so it's okay that we didn't start before. We've gotten started now, and you can see the results that come from it, even if it's taken a long time, even if it will still take the rest of the time you have here. But at least you have, you have a thing. That's really it. You have a thing, something for you.
I think patience is such a virtue, and I think patience is that you need to really have as a photographer, because you're right, like you're not going to have instant success. And even if you do, that's not necessarily what you want. I feel like we're very much blinded by the idea of like, oh, we want to be successful, we want some money. And it's like, well, you also want to learn, you also want to grow, you also want to understand who you are as an artist. It's not just about creating loads of money so quickly. Like for some people it is, but I think people who really feel a calling to be an artist, or people who have a calling to do art, I think their passion for it goes much more deeper than just the money. So I think patience is something that I think everybody needs to learn in terms of like, you're right, it's a great thing to learn. That you will progress. It might take a year, it might take 10 years, it might take your whole life. Any kind of creative endeavor, no matter what it is a lifelong pursuit. It's never going to happen within a year or two. It's lifelong.
Yeah. One of the most inspiring things to me is, like I said, when I was a kid and I read all these skate magazines, all the stories you read about are not the glory of said thing. It's all, oh, remember we were here and this wild thing happened and blah, blah, blah. And we had to sleep in the car for the night. Same thing with stand-up comedians and stuff like that. The thing they reminisce the most on is those sort of struggles. So whenever I feel, like I said, oh, my work's just not good. I went out 3 nights in a row this week, and so far I haven't produced anything. Whenever I feel that, I'm like, oh, look, it's happening. I could easily see them talking about this exact same thing, like in hindsight. So I try to remember that, like, okay, you're living it right now. This is the thing. This bad feeling is not a bad thing. You're gonna look back later and be like, man, that was so fun when I was racking my brain over where should I go next? What should I take a picture of? How should I change my style? How can I reach more people? All that sort of thing that feels miserable in the moment. I know that I'm gonna look back and be like, man, at least I had something to strive for.
Absolutely. And that's a really good way of looking at it, actually. So I have a question for you from the last artist I interviewed, a lady called Rebecca Youssef.
Uh-huh.
And her question for you is, if the future of art is more internet-based, where and how will you incorporate into your work?
The NFT space, 100%. Because I can see it now already. So many things are like, it literally is just a digital art market. All these terms that I've not been exposed to, like, okay, a 101, something like that. I could see it in that world where it's going. And if you just look at any kids around you, how they're, oh, I need to get money from my mom for these new Fortnite skins or whatever. And you have that same feeling of like, where's the value in this? It's just a digital pixel thing. Once you see it in this younger generation coming up, especially as they're starting to get creative, they're starting to get into that world, you can kind of see the future a little bit. Like, oh, this is definitely going to be a thing. And I think it'll be a lot more popular in the future of like, okay, I have an auction on this piece. It's one of one, and the winner also gets a framed print, like physical aspect to it, something like that. I think that's how it will be in the future. Uh, I think people will have. This is really sad to think about, but I think people will have digital real estate, and they'll have their
Mm,
walls the same thing as right now. You can see it. Like
yeah.
a microcosm of it. If you play something like Grand Theft Auto Online or something like, come over to my house, look what I got.
Mm,
And it's like,
yeah.
well, this isn't real. It's like, but yes, it is. We're sitting here hanging out, right? We're looking at it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's where I think it will be in the future.
That's cool. That's really interesting. And I think that kind of that opens up a lot of conversation about stuff like the values of the digital realm and kind of the idea of like what is reality, that kind of stuff. So that's really cool, actually. I like that perspective. And I think it's kind of interesting in terms of like, particularly with the metaverse as well, and that whole kind of concept of like living outside of
Yeah.
your own reality. I think
Uh,
there's a lot of the future in that. I think for better or for worse.
but you could see it even as early as like something like MySpace, even
Mm,
something as simple as having a song playing on your page.
yeah.
It's like uh, I'm presenting something digitally that says something about me and the things that I like.
True.
Um, and as
True.
we become more and more internet based, people are going to have the same thing with images, little moving images, whatever. They're going to want to have this stuff, and they're going to want to display it in their whatever their online sort of presence is. Like I think it really did kind of start out with a MySpace page, stuff like that. Even earlier, fame or whatever, you have your username, a certain thing. It's a digital asset.
Yeah.
And I think images will be that same way. I want it displayed in my thing. And now I think there's a way where you actually pay for that. Artists actually get royalties from that. It's starting to come out of that kind of wild west. It's like it's a JPEG. It's for everybody. Da, da, da. Well, now it's starting to become uh, an actual thing. I'm not sure how to explain it. Like I said, I'm still learning about all that stuff myself. But in the future, I can see that stuff being huge for all the reasons I just said.
So, do you have a question for the next artist I interview?
Yeah, I guess my question would just be super simple: is how do you deal with just feeling really negative and low sometimes if they do? Is there something creatively, like a sort of a creative routine that they use to either take advantage of that feeling or to quell that feeling or whatever it may be? I'd be super interested.
So, uh, me and a good friend of mine called Randy and Howes were talking a while ago about the idea of like, which is more important, the skill of an artist or the personality of an artist? And I was kind of wondering, like, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, for me right now, my answer would be the skill because I don't put my personality on display
Hmm.
hardly at all. It's one of the things I feel the most uptight about. And like I said, that was what my wife was saying to me. She's telling me, I love your taste in movies, your taste in music. It's different from anyone I've ever met before. I feel like you've shown me so many cool things. And that's one thing I really appreciate about what you do is because I feel like you're like a very top tier sort of version of that. That's something that really interests me as well. I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube channel, that guy, the Nerd Writer,
I have not, no.
but he does videos like he did one about Gordon Parks, which is another one. He's kind of in my trio of my top three favorite photographers. He did a video about Gordon Parks um, that really blew me away. And he's not a photographer, and he'll do
Oh.
it about books or whatever. And before I was into photography, that was kind of my expression as well is I want people to see this movie because I want them to feel what I felt. I want to explain to them how it made me feel, what it did for me. And so I would constantly be trying to show that somehow. For right now, I'd say the more important thing is skill, but
Yeah.
I think it will come a point where um, it's way more important than personality. In terms of like making money and having reach and all that, uh, I do think the personality is way more important. But for me, where I'm at right now, I think the
Hmm.
skill is the most important thing because I don't really even show much of myself. Like if you scroll
Yeah.
through my Instagram, there's probably not even an image of me on there.
There's
You
not.
know?
The only image I found of you was on your website.
Yeah. Um, but I'm looking to change that
Hmm.
slowly but surely.
Of course.
Um, but yeah, I'd say in the long run, the personality is more important. But to get noticed, I mean, obviously you need the skill.
Right. I have three more questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, what does it mean to be a successful artist, and how do you measure the success of your own work?
Well, I can only really speak to for myself.
Yeah, of
And like I
course.
said, this might change, but to me, what it means to be a successful artist is creating art that people like, and also, I think having certain thought process about things and interpretations that are unique that you could share with others. I think that's a big part of it, at least for me. Sometimes, like even with us talking now, you know, sometimes I feel like my sort of way of thinking about something you might not have heard it before, or it might be slightly
Absolutely.
different from something. And I think that's a huge part of it, you know. And I think when you can kind of start showing people that without having to sit and ramble about a particular topic or what have you, where they can kind of just get that somehow, just instantly almost,
Hmm.
without you kind of having to hold somebody's hand through it. It's like you can kind of just look, you know. Uh, yeah, I'd say for me that's the most important part. What was the second thing?
I would just say, how do you measure the success of your own work?
Um, I measure the success of my own work by just how I feel about it. There's
Hmm.
nothing really too deep about it. And there's things that I look at and I'll just scroll right past. I'll probably never care about it again. And then there's other ones where I'll feel down about myself and I'll go look at certain images. And they might, what's funny is a lot of these images for me, they don't seem to be like my most popular or anything like that. But there's just certain ones that I know the story behind it.
Yeah.
And when I look at it, I'm like, man, the fact that because I can still remember getting into photography and like going downtown and walking around and not getting a single usable image. And then there's certain images that I've taken that I look at and I compare it to that exact feeling. I was like, who would have thought that you went from taking these images and feeling so bad about things to now you're taking stuff like this and I'll look at it and I'll just, it'll make me feel really good. Like, wow, there actually has been a lot of progress,
Oh, yeah.
and it'll make me feel proud.
Yeah. Absolutely. As it should. Like, honestly, as it should. Like, as it should. So, what do you think your younger self would say about your work?
I think I think my younger self would just be like, "This is so cool!" Like, especially when I look at this image to this song or whatever. Like, this is exactly how I think about things.
Hmm.
It'd be like, well, I don't know if my younger self would know it was me or what, but I think
Yeah.
they'd be like, wow, this is exactly how I see things, Like I could just imagine this being a scene in a movie or something like that. Uh, yeah, I think my younger self would be happy. I think my younger self would be proud of it and would think that it was pretty cool.
See, that's perfect. And I feel like your older self should also be proud of it. I think it's very cool because
No,
it
I,
is something to be proud
I
of. I hope you are
yeah,
because it is something to be proud of. And I mean that very honestly. Like, it's something to be very proud of. And I feel like you're very underrated as a photographer. And I feel like the great thing is you have so much potential. And, you've got the time to grow, which is the best thing.
yeah.
So, my last question for you is a double barrel question. But the last question is, what are you currently working on? And where can people find more about you and your work?
Well, I'm currently working on trying to make a photo book. Um, it's in very early stages now. I've kind of like done a few like mock covers,
Hmm.
very simple subject matter. It's just simply vehicles at night.
Yeah,
About as
absolutely.
straightforward as I could make it.
Absolutely.
Because, like I said, whenever I think of making something like that, like we talked about earlier, my mind immediately jumps to all the hurdles and all the
Hmm.
reasons why I can't do it. And it has to be this special thing that has this certain meaning to it. And so I'm trying to tell my brain, no, just make it simple, make it whatever. There doesn't have to be some fancy name to it that's a euphemism for your soul or whatever. Like literally,
Yeah.
it's just vehicles at night. This
Yeah.
is just interesting. So that's kind of my New Year's resolution is to make that. And I don't know if it would be physical, digital, if I'll sell it or not, but it's just something I want to do to start learning those sort of processes and all that. It's something I would like to have, like to be able
Yeah.
to give somebody, family members, stuff like that. Like, here's this cool little thing I made. It's something that I made.
That's super cool. And where can people find more about you and your work online?
You can find me on Instagram, just McCurdy.photography, and my website is the same name, McCurdy.photography. There's no .com or any of that. But it's funny. I thought it was such a clever name, but a lot of times, like if I link it to someone, I get the sense they don't know what I'm sending them. It's not a traditional
Yeah, of course.
URL.
Yeah, that's weird.
But in the long run, I think it will be good.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yep, I had a great time. Thank you for having me.
No worries, honestly, I really appreciate it. And that concludes my conversation with Christopher McCurdy. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com or on social media sites such as Twitter and Instagram. The Flying Fruit Bowl podcast is available on several platforms such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music. If you like the show, please rate, review, share, and subscribe on any of those platforms to help spread the word. Also, please don't forget to check out theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily inspiration. And if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. The Flying Fruit Bowl also has a Patreon page. If you'd like to support the platform further, we now also have a Patreon page. Tiers start from £1, and you can find more about rewards over at patreon.com/theflyingfruitbowl. Additionally, if you're not interested in the donations, we also have a PayPal for a one-time donation. I'll include a link to our PayPal in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening to this episode today, folks, and until next time, please stay safe.